While most people around the world are familiar with the Greek god Apollo, he is frequently only seen from one angle. In the Hellenistic and Roman period, he was a lord of high culture and interpreted as a purely solar divinity, often equated directly with the sun. Yet there is another Apollo, lurking in the shadows of that more luminous deity, an older, more rustic form which the poet Homer described as stalking by night and unleashing his deadly arrows upon both beasts and men. The Apollo who summons up favorable winds, who strives for vengeance, who warriors call upon for aid, and who guides their arrows to their marks. The Apollo that Homer called Lycagenos, rightly translated as wolf-born. Might this ancient Greek god have some connection to the European cult of the wolf and the tradition of the werewolf? To find out this and more, stick with me. In the fall of 2023, I traveled nearly the entire Peloponnese, visiting numerous sites dedicated to Apollo, seeing his ancient cult in its more local forms. There on the ground and out of the interpretation of writers, he can be found changing his bow in for a spear and a shield, his long locks covered in a shining helm, the idealized image of the youthful warrior. Paeans were sung to him as they marched to war, and the chant became a byname for the god himself. This is Apollo in his full glory, lord of flocks and fields, of battle, of colonization and civilization, of the wild and windy mountains and the craggy shores, of Apollo, the wolf god. Though since Homeric times Apollo has been associated with the word Phoebus, the etymological origin is controversial. Though generally taken to mean light, it rather has the connotation of clear, pure, bright, radiant, which in the case of Apollo doesn't necessarily mean that he was thought of as being the god of light, but may have been intended to refer to his mental attributes or even his ability to purify. When studying the most archaic level of Apollo, it becomes clear that there is a disconnect between the vision of Apollo who comes in dark clouds of mist in the night and the later solar god of Hellenistic Greece. One of the leading academics who laid out a coherent theory of this older image of Apollo is Daniel Gershenson in his book titled Apollo, the Wolf God. Now, at the sanctuary of Delphi, probably the most famous site associated with the god due to the international fame the oracle received, Pausanias recorded the following.
Near the great altar is a bronze wolf, an offering of the Delphians themselves. They say that a fellow robbed the god of some treasure and kept himself and the gold hidden in the place on Mount Parnassus where the forest is thickest. As he slept, a wolf attacked and killed him, and every day went to the city and howled. When the people began to realize that the matter was not without the direction of heaven, they followed the beast and found the sacred gold. So, to the god they dedicated a bronze wolf.
Likewise located upon Mount Parnassus was a town called Lycoria, formed from the Greek word for wolf, lykos. People there believed that wolves had saved them from the flood of Deucalion. A howling pack of wolves led them to the mountaintop. Clearly the region was home to a god whose messengers were wolves, and who at one time may have even been thought to take the form of a wolf himself. In an account of the birth of Apollo and Artemis, Aristotle remarked, "When they transported Leto from the land of the Hyperboreans to the island of Delos, she assumed the form of a she-wolf to escape the anger of Hera." The myth matches with Homer's description of Apollo as wolf-born. Autolycus, meaning the wolf itself, was the grandfather of Odysseus, and the man who gave the hero his name. He trained Heracles in wrestling. Autolycus lived on Mount Parnassus, which was also the location of the town of Lycoria and the temple to Apollo at Delphi. Autolycus was a twin son of Chione. While Hermes laid with her in the day, Apollo came to her in the night. The result were the sons Autolycus, the cattle-rustling thief, and Philemon, the great singer and lyre player. Like with the Homeric hymn, where the god Apollo and Hermes exchange sacred items, and thus powers, here too they appear joined at the hip, and one could certainly argue differentially realized manifestations of the same ancient god. That Autolycus then goes on to dwell on the mountain sacred to Apollo, where Hermes likewise has a sacred cave, only illustrates this symbiosis. But why is Apollo associated with the wolf? It's something that the ancients likewise struggled with, because even in ancient times, the mystic reasons for these associations were lost or were known only to a small circle of priests. One straightforward answer is that as a lord who oversees flocks and herds, he protected them against the wolf. This would make him the wolf-slaying god. Yet might there be another, arcane meaning lurking behind this association? In Norse myth, the wolf Skoll chases the sun across the sky every day. The name means treachery or mockery. It's prophesied that he will consume the sun during Ragnarok, but that a new sun will be born. This is probably related to the solar eclipse, explained as a wolf devouring the sun. Hati is likewise the wolf that chases the moon and will devour it. Now there is likewise a natural phenomenon, which is called a sundog in English, or parhelion from the Greek name, in which an atmospheric effect makes it appear as if there are multiple suns, and a similar effect exists for the moon called a moondog. Now some have suggested that this is the origin of the myth of the wolves chasing the sun and moon, and possibly even explains the name Skoll referring to an illusion. Certainly the English names for the effects suggest an archaic connection. The two wolves are sometimes said to be the children of, if not identical to, Fenrir, the wolf who devours Odin. If the children of the wolf devoured the two great lights, then perhaps we can understand Odin as light itself, or possibly the sky, or even physical space. The wolves consume all the lights of the sky, and perhaps the sky itself. Vidar avenges his father by putting one foot on the wolf's bottom jaw and holding up his upper jaw, as if he is again creating this space which the wolf had devoured, perhaps ripping back open the sky like the break of dawn brings forth the bright sky. But Odin himself travels in the company of wolves and is frequently associated with the animal. The Ulfhethnar is another name for a berserker. Berserker is thought to mean one who wears the pelt of a bear and takes on the persona of a bear while fighting, while Ulfhethnar means wolf skinners who take on the nature of the wolf. There are numerous depictions of this in pre-Christian Germanic art. Ancient warriors dancing, often with spears, dressed as wolves. The wolf hunts the flocks by night. This is similar to how Apollo stalks up on the camp of the Greeks at night and begins by slaying all of their cattle, like a hungry wolf stalking their camp. Now, the wolf is a hunter, and so too is Apollo, the lord of the silver bow. His arrows end the life of men, just as his sister Artemis's arrows end the life of women. This hunter aspect of Apollo is later submerged As the nature of the god shifts over time, becoming increasingly the figure of light and civilized activity, he loses much of this original hunting characteristic along with his darker side, found still in Homer. But Artemis remains the fierce huntress. One of the reasons for Apollo's shift towards the representative of art and culture is likely to be found in his role as the protector and teacher of the youth, represented by his name Korythos. He guides them in the knowledge and self-control required to become men. But Apollo was also the god of colonization. When young men were sent out from a Greek community facing overpopulation, they would be dedicated to Apollo. Now this is very similar to Mars of the Romans, who is another god likewise linked to wolves, and who young men were also dedicated to when they were sent out on these colonial expeditions. So I visited the sanctuary of Apollo in Argos in 2023. It's a beautiful site, though nothing has been reconstructed of it. It's the home of many frogs, and is perhaps one of the wettest places in the area, and possibly this isn't a coincidence. Pausanias said that the sanctuary held the throne of Danaus, as well as the eternal flame of Pheronius, who is effectively a local Prometheus, the bringer of fire and the primordial king, and son of the river Inachos, which flows by the city, possibly connecting him to an ancient Indo-European concept of the emergence of fire out of water. About 3,700 years before I was there, according to legend, Danaus, son of Belus, arrived and claimed rulership over the land. At dawn, a wolf appeared at the walls and attacked a bull. The two fought viciously, but eventually the wolf prevailed. The locals interpreted it as a sign. The wolf, they said, was the outsider, and as he won the battle, so Danaus should have the kingdom. Yet the wolf was believed to have been led there by Apollo, and so a shrine to Apollo was established. That Apollo led the wolf can also be understood as Apollo leading Danaus, as he lived as the outsider, dedicated to the worship of the god. I also paid a visit to a very obscure former temple to Apollo, not far from Koroni, in the southwestern tip of the Peloponnese. Now, Koroni itself is seemingly named for the raven, the bird of Apollo, and once the town itself was home to one of his temples. North of Koroni, however, there is another site dedicated to Apollo, here known as Korythos. I'm here at the temple of the sanctuary of Apollo Korythos. It's one of the most archaic forms of Apollo, associated often with war. Korythos refers to a helmet, so he is the helmet-wearing one. Excavations of this site revealed bronze arrowheads, bronze spear points, dedicated to Apollo, linking him to the function of war. There is also representations of hoplites dedicated to him here. Now, in later periods, of course, Apollo is most connected with healing, but most of his most archaic worship revolves around war and the ideal young man, which involves learning many skills. You see, there is actually a house just over there, so we're actually kind of in someone's backyard. Imagine having a sanctuary of Apollo in your backyard. It's one of the benefits of being a Greek, I suppose. Now, obviously, there's not a lot standing of the structure. It's basically the foundations, but a pretty amazing spot, actually, because a lot of the over-touristed areas, they just feel somehow unnatural or manufactured in some way. This place is a little bit mysterious. It was an important pilgrimage site of the Mycenaeans. Despite their intense strife with the Spartans, this was the same guise of Apollo that the Spartans knew also. In the Iliad, of course, Apollo is clearly linked to war, and is one of the major actors in the battle, frequently invoked by warriors when they cast a spear or let loose an arrow. He is wrathful and implacable, though Zeus is most often depicted as controlling the fates of war. In the Seven Against Thebes, it was said that Apollo decided victory in battle. One of the most striking points is Apollo's connection with the warrior Fury in the Iliad. When Hector is exhausted, beaten back, and near defeat, Zeus sends Apollo to aid him, along with his Aegis, which can be translated as storm winds. He descends down to earth as a hawk and breathes strength into Hector. He then travels before the hero as he re-enters the fray. This may be intended to convey that a powerful wind was advancing against the Danaans to the benefit of the Trojans, making it very difficult for them to shoot arrows at them. It describes Apollo. So long as Phoebus Apollo still held in his hands the Aegis, so long the thrown weapons of both took hold, and men dropped under them. But when he stared straight into the eyes of the fast-mounted Danaans and shook the Aegis, and himself gave a great baying cry, the spirit inside them was mazed to hear it. They forgot their furious valor. The baying cry of Apollo is in Greek ao, which is believed to be cognate with Latin ululo. It's a word developed from the imitation of the howling of a wolf. In the battle, Apollo takes away the battle fury of the enemy forces, while at the same time he breathes into Hector the battle fury which Homer calls lyssa, a term associated with both divine battle madness and animal fury, which itself is derived from the word for a wolf. This transformation makes him an unstoppable force as he leads the Trojans in a renewed assault against the Achaeans, with Apollo before him. The poet describes it. And they, as when in the dim of the black night, two wild beasts stampede a herd of cattle, or big flock of sheep, falling suddenly upon them, when no herdsman is by. The Achaeans fled so in their weakness and terror, since Apollo drove terror upon them, and gave the glory to the Trojans and Hector. Apollo and Hector are compared to two wolves setting upon a flock at night, overcome by battle rage, with their enemies fleeing in terror before them like sheep. This, above perhaps anything else, is the clearest picture of the archaic Apollo. Like Odin, he grants to the warrior the battle fury, and can take it away from the opposing side, crippling them. He can allow the missiles to hit their mark, as he controls the airs and winds, and he brings terror upon those he turns against, as he howls like a wolf. Now, a paean is a chant that would be performed along the march to battle, but it's also the name of a figure who becomes known as a son of Apollo. The purpose of the paean was to protect the warrior from evil, protect them from harm by invoking the god as their protector. The word comes from an Indo-European root meaning to hit, strike, or cut, and thus originally Apollo paean meant Apollo the striker, similar to his epithet, the one who strikes from afar. The original connection between Apollo and healing is the force that Apollo can wield, which drives away evil, believed to be the source of hurt, sickness, and death. Yet conversely, the god can also bring about these same forces, frequently interpreted as his arrows. In the ancient mind, these evil forces travel through the wind. And the bow of Apollo was forged by Hephaestus, which suggests its radiant and fiery nature. Homer typically described it as silver, and only in later times, when the god becomes increasingly linked to the sun, do poets describe it as golden. It's a weapon feared even by the gods, though its exact nature is never precisely laid out, though it was invariably thought to cause death. Occasionally, the god is even connected with storms and lightning. When the Celts were attacking Delphi, for instance, it was said that he conjured up a furious storm with lightning and snow. However, more commonly, the arrow has the power of instant death or disease, especially linked to men, while his sister Artemis is thought to have the exact same power, but over women. This force is likely connected to the spirit, and most archaically, to the wind, through which the spirit manifests. The arrows of Apollo can be compared to the elf shot of Germanic tradition, or spears or arrows of the Gaelic Sluaishia. In English, we frequently say that the wind howls or roars as if it were a wolf or ferocious beast. And there is likewise the folktale of the three little pigs, where the wolf blows the house down and finally attempts to come down through the chimney. Now this is thwarted by the pigs boiling a cauldron on the fire, which the wolf falls into. Now with a traditional wood fireplace, when the wind is howling, depending on air pressure and other factors, that wind will sometimes force its way down the chimney. Now, one way to help mitigate this was to keep a boiling pot over the fire. The hot steam rising from the pot not only helps to heat the home, but it actually counteracts this downward cold airflow. So it seems that the wolf was anciently associated with the wind in early European thought. In the Volospot says, "There will be evil times, an age of whoredom, of sharp sword play and cloven shields, a wind age, a wolf age, till the world is made to fall." Now perhaps wolf, warg, and wind are put together for the sake of alliteration, but more likely it's that these two are linked concepts to the skald. The art of prophecy, so strongly connected with Apollo, can likewise be understood as related to the air. In Delphi, it was believed that oracles were caused by air issuing from the ground. Strabo, in his geography, said,
"The oracle is situated above the temple of Apollo, in a cavern hollowed out deep in the earth, and it is a common belief that the women who deliver the oracles are inspired by a pneuma, meaning breath or vapor, that rises from the depths of the cavern."
Plutarch, who actually served as a priest of Apollo at Delphi, confirms this, saying,
"In the sanctuary of the god, there is a chasm in the ground, from which there comes a vapor that inspires a divine frenzy. Those women who inhale it are filled with divine power and utter words that reveal the future. The god makes use of them as instruments, and through them he reveals his will."
Now, no cavern has yet actually been found at the site. There probably wasn't actually a cavern there at all, but people strongly believed that air issuing from such a cavern or crevice would be the origin through which Apollo would speak through these women. Now, this doesn't exactly seem very solar related, and that's because, well, it isn't. The air issuing from beneath the earth is connected in some very important way to Apollo, who perhaps possesses the Pythia, causing them to enter their prophetic trance, or what the ancient Germanic people would have called wodas. The Celtic vatis and the Latin vates both mean seer and have a cognate root with wodan, being wod, which refers to a fury, frenzy, or madness. And this madness is related to the state of the soul, which Plutarch details.
That by a sort of chilling and compacting of the spirit of inspiration, the prophetic element in the soul, as when steel is dipped in cold water, is rendered tense and keen. And further, just as tin, when alloyed with copper, is loose and porous in texture, binds it together and compacts it, and at the same time makes it brighter and cleaner. Even so, there is nothing to prevent the prophetic vapor, which contains some affinity and relationship to the soul, from filling up the vacant spaces and cementing all together by fitting itself in.
Yet while Plutarch sees a connection between the prophetic powers and the air, he doesn't really understand or even try to explain how this is actually connected to Apollo. He refutes the notion that Apollo is the physical sun, but he likens the sun to the eye and Apollo to the light, which allows it to see, or the body to the spirit. In Italy, Servius, commenting on the Aeneid, said that the shepherds who were chasing wolves came upon a cave that was emitting poisonous fumes that would kill people that got near it. They were told that they had offended the god by their actions, but that they could be absolved through acting as wolves. They thus became known as the Harapi Sorani, wolves of Soranus. Now, Soranus is believed to be a Latinized name of the Etruscan Suri, and his cult would become fused with that of Apollo. And yet the main reason for his association with Apollo appears to be his link to wolves, and with the airs issuing from under the earth, as well as his oracular function. Possibly what Servius recalls about Apollo Soranus had little to do with any Etruscan myth, and had more to do with the Italic Falsican tradition, where wolves were called Harapi. The wolf nature of Apollo was preserved when his cult was taken up by the Etruscans. Called Aplu in the Etruscan language, he was frequently pictured wearing a wolf cap. This wolf cap may have a mysterious connection to another Greek tale, that of Perseus. He is given shoes that let him fly through the air, and a hat of Hades, which grants him invisibility. Yet the hat is called Aedos Kunen, literally the hound skin of Hades. Miletos, the eponymous founder of this city, was said to be the son of Apollo and the nymph Akakalis. When his mother left him in the woods to die, Apollo sent wolves to care for him. There is also revealed in this myth the old connections between Hermes and Apollo, namely that Akakalis also had Kidon, the twin of Miletos, yet his father was Hermes rather than Apollo. Now, by the same token, it's possible that Mars, the so-called god of war, is in origin a god with similar origins as Apollo. Like Apollo, one of his primary cult animals are wolves. He is the god of the exile and the warrior band, a god of the youths which are sent out from the city. He was also early on a prophetic god linked to bird prophecy and especially the woodpecker. He is the father of twins who are suckled by a she-wolf, and whose mythology seems to reflect an older creation myth. And as surprising as it sounds, Apollo's connection with the dolphin also seems to have strange connections with the wolf. It was believed by Greek sailors that a dolphin appearing in a dream was a good omen and signaled the direction the wind would blow from. Dolphins swimming into the harbor was a sign of a coming storm, and in the Homeric hymn, when Apollo is in the form of a dolphin, he summoned a strong wind to carry the ship to his desired destination. The daughter of Danaus, who is the founder of the cult of Apollo Lykios, was Amymone, who rode on dolphins and was a lover of Poseidon. The dolphin may have been thought of as a kind of wolf of the sea, chasing the fish and moving in packs, much like the wolf of land. And like the wolf, the dolphin goes down into the unknown, into the dark and mysterious world of the sea, as the wolf dwells in the dark and mysterious woods. And thus there is a strong element of the liminal with both of these creatures. Now we can connect this theme perhaps with that found in the Gaelic language. At some point, the original Celtic word for the wolf, lukos, cognate with Latin lupus and Greek dikos, is replaced by various others. This was likely for fear of using the name and calling the wolf upon oneself. However, it is actually still found in some limited cases in Old Gaelic, rendered luch, so the terrible wolf which the hero Celtchar is charged with slaying is called the luch dawn, sometimes erroneously translated as mouse, but which is clear from the story is intended to mean wolf, showing a persisting awareness that Luch also referred to a wolf. In fact, even the origin of the name for mouse in Gaelic may refer to it as a wolf. Very likely Gaulish names like Leucotius and Leucotiacon are derived from the root for wolf, which through sublimation becomes applied to mice, referring to them as voracious eaters like a wolf, but also diminishing the wolf at the same time by referring to it as a mouse. A similar dynamic exists with Apollo's connection with both wolves and mice, possibly linked to their nocturnal nature and their appetites. In Old Gaelic, a typical name for a sea monster or whale was bleth, which is actually cognate with the Welsh word blythe, meaning wolf, from Proto-Celtic bledios. A symbolic connection, therefore, between a sea mammal like a dolphin and a wolf is certainly within the realm of existing European traditions. Along the same lines, there may be a connection between the wolf and the seal. Psamathe in Greek myth was a Nereid who lay with Aeacus and gave birth to a son, Phocos, the eponymous ancestor of the land of Phocis. She was said to have given birth in the form of a seal, and sent wolves to attack Peleus's herd after he and his brother murdered her son. In Gaelic tradition, Cu Namara literally means hound of the sea and refers to a seal. The association with Apollo and the wolf seems to have very archaic origins, dating to long before the name Apollo was ever associated with a specific deity. This werewolf and militant aspect of the earlier wolf god becomes exclusively associated with Zeus, the archaic, raging, and fierce god who brought storm winds and death along with his wolf band, who is a leader of the young warriors, begins to fade into a god of prophecy and sun. Now, much of this, however, is likely overlapping with a video that I did covering this topic of werewolves, and if you're interested in that topic, I highly suggest that you check that video out. But if you're interested in some more in-depth analysis of medieval werewolf tales, keep following the channel, because your wish will soon be granted. Now, the reason for Apollo's association with the wolf are complex, but they lie within the ancient stratum of Indo-European mythology, which has connections with gods like Norse Odin, Gaelic Lugh, Roman Mars. On some level, there is evidence to suggest a relationship with the sun, or at least celestial movement, but not in the way that later becomes ascribed to Apollo. The wolf seems most connected with the winds and possibly the underworld, and on closer inspection, so does Apollo himself. He is born in the most liminal of places, a place which rose up from out of the sea, just like the dolphin, and affixed to no place. While he comes increasingly to take on a solar characteristic, the identity of Apollo who strikes from afar originates in his powers of spirit and wind. This is the legacy of Apollo, the wolf god. I hope you found this interesting, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe. Remember, I rely on your support, so I hope you will check out Patreon, PayPal, or consider giving me a YouTube super sticker, or become a member of the channel. Thank you all for watching, and as always, stand tall.